Hi everybody, welcome to my fifth video. It's going to be about a list of different albums that I have in my collection that I want to tell you about. And I got the idea for this from a video by the fellow over at Noble Records. It's called Vinyl Tag. And the list that I'm going to be following for the ideas for each of the items I'm going to share with you is going to be down in the down under. So if you like, you can play along too. You can respond to one or more of the questions in the comments, or you can list your selections for all of them. Let's get at this. By the way, this is take two. So the first item in the list is to name a favorite album from the city you live in or the state you live in. And I live in Chicago, and so there's lots of good choices that I could select. In Chicago, there's home of Chicago blues. Muddy Waters used to live here. Howlin' Wolf used to live here. Buddy Guy has a bar here, and which I've been to a couple times, but he was never there. And then, there are other bands that have achieved some relative fame. There's Cheap Trick from Rockford, Illinois. And you may have heard of Mason Prophet, kind of a country rock band from the 70s that came from Champaign-Urbana area where the University of Illinois is located. But the one I'm going to select, which also came from Champaign-Urbana area, is this band called Poster Children. And this is the album Daisy Chain Reaction. I first heard about these guys when I was watching, you remember the show on MTV 120 Minutes? Well, that's how I found out about this band, and I, bought the CD at the time, and then this is the 25th anniversary reissue of the album. It's got a very cool label on it. Got a little booklet that comes with it as well. They're kind of a punk, post-punk, pop, grunge band. Really, really good stuff. Highly recommend it. This is readily available in many record stores. It can be purchased on Amazon as well. Really, really good stuff from Champaign-Urbana. They recently, they made a few albums during the 90s. Then they came back like in last year after a hiatus of, more than a decade, I think it was. I have three of their albums now. And they came up with this newest one as sort of a response to the current administration. It's really killer. You should check it out. All right, now the next one on the list is an album you recommend highly. So this is an album that in an artist, performer, you may not know much about. And that is this fellow, Moondog. Got it on the white vinyl. So yes, this is a reissue of Moondog, the eponymous album, because the originals of this are really expensive, and I'm not going to pay that kind of money for an original, but this is really great stuff. Moondog, very legendary, was born Louis Hardin, all right? He was born in 1916, and he was kind of a self-taught composer. At the age of 15, I think it was, he was blinded in a mining accident. So, back then, kids worked in mines. And so he was blinded. He went to a school for the blind where he continued to study music. Eventually, right around 1947, he adopted the name Moondog. And he moved to New York City, where he became known as the Viking of Sixth Avenue because he would be dressed in this Viking garb. You know, you can see a little bit of it, you know, here on the album cover. I'll turn it sideways so you know you can see it a little bit. So he was dressed in this Viking garb, and he'd be standing on the corner there of Sixth Avenue, someplace there in Manhattan, and he would be reciting poetry and just speaking ad lib, you know, to people that would pass by. He befriended Charlie Parker, and in fact, there is a song on here called "Bird's Lament," which is really fantastic. And he also invented some musical instruments that he uses. So it's a cross between avant-garde jazz and classical composition, or I should say orchestral composition, because after all, classical is a period of music. It's not all orchestral music. But anyway, really good stuff. And if you see it, you should check that one out. All right. Now, the next item on this list here is a tip for beginners. My best advice for newcomers to vinyl collecting is spend the money on a decent turntable. Seriously, there are a lot of really cheap turntables out there. And I will tell you that if you start off thinking, oh, I'm just getting a cheapo, you know, something less than $100 or something like that. No, these, in fact, are bad for your records. In particular, the one that probably has the most negative reputation in the market is the Crosley. You may have seen them, they're like really cheap, but really, they will destroy your records. So I would recommend at a minimum $200 for your budget for a turntable. And turntables these days come usually with a preamp in them. So you don't need to get an amplifier or receiver to power your system because most new turntables have a preamp already in them. And then they make speakers as well that have amplifiers within them. So all you need is the turntable and a couple of speakers that have volume control because there's the built-in amplifier. Klipsch is a very high quality speaker that you can start off with. And then right there, that's all you need is that kind of a turntable with that type of speaker, and boom, you're off and you're ready to listen to your vinyl. So remember, don't be cheap. Okay, next one is the first record that got me deeper into music. That's how it reads. Not exactly sure what that means, got me deeper into music. But the one I picked for this is an album I heard for the first time probably when I was 9 or 10 years old. And it like blew my mind. Like that. Yep, there it is. King Crimson in the Court of the Crimson King. Was released, I think, in 1969. This is a classic prog rock album. And kind of and this is a reissue, even though it's got the very cool pink label. But, you know, even when you look along the spine, you know, on this album, there's like no text, you know, anywhere. And this was troublesome for the record company, the band. That's how they wanted it. They had this really bizarre album cover art, and that's just all they wanted. And that's how it showed up in stores, you know, like this. And it was like no other information, no track listing on the outside. And so needless to say, it didn't do so well when it was first released. However, it has become an icon of progressive rock. It was also the debut for Greg Lake, And King Crimson went through many incarnations, generally held together by guitarist Peter Fripp. So great record, and that's one I would describe as one that it really got me thinking about what could be accomplished with rock music and popular music in general. So it did. It really opened my mind. It was Robert Fripp. I misspoke. Sorry. Moving on to the next one is an obscure record people may not know about. And I've got a few obscure records, but the one I selected for this video is this one here by Ed Sanders, Sanders Truck Stop. It's an original. You can find these for not too expensive for original, but they'll probably, like this one, be in kind of rough shape. The album plays nicely. But anyway, Ed Sanders, this was released in 1969. He was a member of the Fugs, which I discovered both Ed Sanders and the Fugs on one of those Lost Leader compilations that Warner Brothers released. That's not necessarily going to be the style of music for everybody, but it's very satirical. He mocks hillbilly culture. There's some spoken word, very biting satire in the lyrics, going along with a traditional country rhythms, very much in the tradition of Jonathan Swift. I think the stuff is great. It's hilarious. So you might put that on your want list, and who knows, you might see it show up at a store sometime. Next is a group or artist that you try to collect everything. And there is one in particular, and that is Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. To show how serious I am, I have, for example, you see back there on the shelf is the 40th anniversary 6 CD release of the live show Zappa in New York. Then I also have the vinyl 40th anniversary release of Zappa in New York, which is on 3 sides, or excuse me, 3 discs, 3 records. And then I also have the original release, US release that came out in the 70s. I think it was 77 when it was released, on Discreet Records. So that's a 2-record set. But then I had to hunt down the true original pressing, which is one of my grails, and I did finally get it this past year. And believe me, it wasn't cheap. And that's this, I have it here. It says OG, uncensored. It was also released on Discreet, but only a couple hundred. It was like less than 500, I'm pretty sure, of these pressings were released primarily in Europe. And they have the song on there called Punky's Whips. And Terry Bozzio, who was the drummer at that time with Zappa's band, had this weird infatuation with Punky Meadows of the hair band Angel. And so that's what this song is about. Punky Meadows thought that the song was, funny, and it was, a neat homage, so to speak. But the rest of the band, they did not like it at all. So the other band members sued, and they got distribution of the album halted. And then that led to the other release, which omits Punky's Whips, and also has a shorter version. Let me see here if I can remember. Shorter version of the song. I think it's yeah, a shorter version of the song. I promise not to come in your mouth. Nonetheless, several hundred of the first original uncensored versions of the album had gone out to stores. And so I've been on the hunt for that original release, and I did finally find it. There's a whole other story that I may cover about my acquisition of this release in another video. But yes, I want to get everything by Frank Zappa, including stuff on CD, because a lot of his material was never released on vinyl. It's only available on CD. And I also have an external hard drive that has a lot of digital bootlegs on it from different concerts and things like that. I used to have a blog about Frank Zappa. It was called Frank Zappa's Revenge. You can still find it on the internet. All you have to do is type into Google Frank Zappa's Revenge, and you will find it and you will see what I was doing there. Now, the next one is a band whose second album is better than their first. And there's lots of possibilities on there. Typically someone might say Led Zeppelin 2, the second album being better than the first. There's lots of choices, and it'd be interesting to hear from you. So, leave a comment what you think. But I'm going to stick with Frank Zappa again. And I'm going to go with Absolutely Free. It's like this, but here's the spine. And nice, cool. This is a reissue on Zappa Records. I also have the first OG release in mono and the first OG release in stereo. Again, I'm trying to collect everything he's got. Also comes with the libretto. I think it's better than Freak Out. Freak Out is an outstanding. There's no doubt about that. However, this one is, I think, tighter, and both the lyrical and musical theme is stronger and expressed better on this one, I think. If this was also, I believe this was also the very first Frank Zappa album I ever listened to. I was 9 years old, and yeah, that probably has a lot to do with the way I am right now. So the next item it's called Whack-A-Mole, or a random pick from my collection. And my collection is shelved on various shelves distributed around my living room, so it's kind of hard for me to randomly pick something, because as soon as I go to one shelf, I already know essentially from what, area of the alphabet or style of music I'm going to be picking from. But the neat thing about Discogs is that you can have it generate a random pick if you have your collection all inside of it. I do recommend that you look up Discogs. It's a great place for you to catalog your collection to keep track of what you have. So I did that, and the random pick it gave me was this, Tangerine Dream. And this is Force Majeure. And Tangerine Dream is a very cool electronica avant-garde band, kind of ambient, from Europe. I believe they're all German. They began in 1967 as a psych rock group, and then they became more and more devoted to exclusively electronica. From the mid 70s up until this is their 12th album, and probably up to here from this and then the earlier releases are when they were in their prime. Great stuff if you like electronica. I know for some people It's kind of, yeah, you kind of like listen to it once in a while, but it is really good stuff. A lot of good material. I really like it. So we're going to move on to what album have you listened to the most? I don't think there's any doubt that I have listened to Aladdin Sane throughout my life more than any other album in my collection now or ever. It is my favorite Bowie album, although my favorite Bowie song is on Ziggy Stardust on that album, and that was the first Bowie album I ever heard. But this one, especially during my high school years, I listened to this repeatedly, day after day. Just love the stuff. I can sing along with the entire album without ever having to look up lyrics or anything like that. I just know it that well. Um, and of course, I had to, buy a re-release because I lost my original years ago. But yeah, it's a great album. My favorite Bowie album, as I said. So if you haven't listened to, I mean, there's great songs. Drive In Saturday is just, and then of course there's Cracked Actor, which is a song about a washed up porn star. There's just great material on this, and Mick Ronson on guitar just really cooks. He's just phenomenal on this record. Now, the next question is, name an album with a crazy story. And there are two ways that, I can take this. One is that there's a crazy story about the production of the album, or a crazy story about my experience with the album. And I decided to go with the latter. Boston's debut. I hated this album for decades. I just couldn't possibly listen to it. And the reason was my freshman year in college. I am moving into the dorm, and across the hall is this guy playing this record non-stop, over and over and over, blasting that music just over. And then when the needle got to the end of the record, he'd pick it up and start it over again. Yeah, I hated it. But after many years of distance between that experience, um, I thought maybe, it's kind of a classic album, very unique in a lot of ways, including, its production and recording and instrumentation. I mean, it's a significant album. And so I thought, okay. And I saw it in a store for pretty cheap. And I thought, all right, what the hell? I'll get it. Yeah, it's not bad. I kind of like it now. All right, so the next question is to name a collecting pet peeve. And my pet peeve has to deal with vinyl retailers. And I just get so annoyed with record stores that pack the records, they just pack the cubicles so full that you gotta really struggle if it's a shelf like I have that, kind of pull it out. And then they don't even put, plastic covers on it. So every time you're pulling something out, the cover is rubbing against another, or when it's the bins, you can't, it's like you have to keep pulling stuff out to even see what it is. Yeah, that just really annoys me. If you're a record seller and that's how you do your store, stop. All right, so the next one is an album or genre that people might be surprised to find out that I like. And I decided to, there were a couple albums that I could have again selected, but I decided to go with the genre, and it's opera. I like opera. Most of my opera collection is on CD, but I do have some. And the interesting thing about classical or orchestral music in general and opera in particular, a lot of record stores will have copies in like near mint condition for really, really cheap because it's not a genre, in high demand. Um, the one I have here, for example, this one was a little more expensive. It's trying to remember if it's a two or three record set. I haven't listened to it in a while, but it cost me $9. But I've seen, a lot of single LP orchestral pieces. They're like $1, and they're like in perfect condition. So anyway, it's Benjamin Britten and Owen Wingrave is this particular opera. Very cool, comes in a box, got a very cool libretto inside here or booklet. And I heard of Benjamin Britten, see, so it's got the libretto and everything in here. I had heard of Benjamin Britten while watching the movie Moonrise Kingdom. It's a Wes Anderson film from 2012. And one of the pieces in there is Noah's Flood, which is, Noah's flood. It figures prominently in not just musically in the movie, but also in the story of the film. And so I did eventually find the copy of it that I wanted. The interesting thing about Owen Wingrave, I kind of just picked that up while I was still on the hunt for this, and it worked out really, really well because it's the story of a man who rebels against his militaristic family past by refusing to go into the military and go into war. And that story theme really resonates with me because I'm very much a pacifist, very much anti-war, anti-violence. And so it was kind of a nice accidental find, and then the fact that I decided to pick it up and investigate it. So don't be afraid of orchestral music because, believe it or not, a lot of popular and rock musicians have classical backgrounds and classical training. So, it's worth checking out. The next one is my birth year album, or an album from my birth year. In my earlier video the other day about albums of my decades, part one, I had one that was in there, but here's another one from my birth year. Okay, John Coltrane, Soul Train. Very cool on the Prestige label. Not an OG, but very good stuff. John Coltrane is a jazz musician and artist that I also collect a lot of his work. So that's a good one, and you can find it in that. You might pay the price of a new album for something that's 50 years old or older, and but it's good stuff if you can find it in good shape. There's a lot of it that shows up in record stores that's been played to death, so you just got to keep looking for it. All right, the next one is show a 10-inch record that you have and give your opinion about 10-inch records, or just give your opinion of 10-inch records if you don't have one. And I do have one. It's this reissue of Thelonious Monk, The Genius of Modern Music, Volume 1. It's classic jazz. It's great. But here's my opinion about 10 inches in general. It's a very problematic format. Um, so it's not my favorite. I mean, it's it's just not my favorite format for vinyl. Putting the tone arm and putting it further in. Wanting to get it in the outside groove, but you don't want to drop it on the mat. It's just not my favorite format. But I do have one, and I would prefer an EP, a 12-inch EP, as opposed to a 10-inch. Okay, the next one is to share an interesting fact about an album or a song. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here because I'm talking about two songs on two different albums, but there is a connection. And of course, everybody, everybody knows this. Uh, just a classic and really, really well recorded album. Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd. I mean, the first time I heard this when I was 14 years old, it was like, but the interesting fact here is that the engineer in the production of this album was a fellow named Alan Parsons. And Alan Parsons had been a producer and an engineer, recording engineer, for a while. He was very well known, and so the Floyd got him. And that's really part of the reason why this album sounds so freaking good, is because of Alan Parsons' work in the sound engineering. And the song Time, now you remember in the song Time how that starts off where you hear all these clocks ticking and then they all start chiming at once. Well, Alan Parsons found a clock store, a clockmaker or clocksmith, and he noticed that, and I can't remember where it was. It might have been in London, it might have been in Paris. I don't remember. But one of the things that struck Parsons was that the shopkeeper had every single clock in that store all wound up and synchronized. So every hour or every quarter hour, because lots of clocks do chime on the quarter hour, but on every hour, every clock in that store began to chime. And that's what he recorded. He came back, set up the recording equipment, and that's how he got that at the start of that song on Dark Side of the Moon. Now, the Floyd were like really impressed with what Alan Parsons did, and they wanted him to do the sound engineering on their next release, Wish You Were Here. But he declined, and he moved on to start his own project, the Alan Parsons Project. So I got this one here, I, Robot. Very cool label on this. And the interesting thing in here, I don't know if you're familiar, how familiar you might be with the album, but one of the songs is called Some Other Time. And very much there's a lot of themes of reminiscing and dealing with the passage of time, etc. On this album. And in that song, there's a male voice that is singing the song, and then the refrain comes, and then the singer comes out with a very, very, very strong voice. Some other place, some other time, some other place, some other time. But it's a different singer. It's not the same vocalist that sings the rest of the song. And the reason was Parsons was disappointed that the primary vocalist, his range wasn't strong enough to sing that refrain. So he went around and tried to find someone with a similar voice and similar timbre to the voice And so that refrain in the song is not sung by a man at all, but by a woman. And he mixed the two together. And if you didn't know this, you probably didn't, you couldn't tell that it was a different person singing that. You would think that it was the same person all the way through the song. Now that I've told you and you go back and listen, yes, you can detect some slight differences between the two. But I mean, that's just how incredible he was in terms of sound engineering. Alan Parsons is clearly that kind of recording and technical genius in that respect. Not to mention, he's written some pretty awesome stuff. Okay, we're getting close to the end here, just a few more to go. The next one is to show an animal, not an animal, show a album cover with an animal on it. And this is the one I selected, the Budos Band. Look at that cobra. This is some serious funk. Oh man, kind of a jazzy funk. I mean, I could easily catalog this in my collection with my jazz, but I put it with my R&B and soul and funk section. I tell you what, man, they got some baritone sax players on here that are just shredding it. Love it. Great stuff. And then the next one is show an album with crazy artwork. And, you know, I was going through my collection. There's plenty of stuff out there that the album artwork is, pretty crazy. I mean, in the Court of the Crimson King, that's some pretty wild album art. But here's a new one, or newish one, Malibu Ken. This is Aesop Rock and Tobacco collaborating together on this album. I mean, look at that! Wow! I mean, in that, and then the label, oh, this is some. But the artwork in general, so. I mean, oh, look at that! Amazing. I mean, there's some, some inserts too, these cutouts that you can, do your own stuff. So yeah, this is a really, really bizarre, freakish album cover. But I tell you what, the music is just incredible. A friend of mine, Facebook friend, posted about this in January of 2019, and he said that this was already in January 2019. He was declaring it the best new release of the year. And then he said, possibly of the decade. And, the other thing too is look at this beautiful blue vinyl. Oh. And it's hard not to disagree with him. This is some really, really super intelligent hip hop. The lyrics are really, really cerebral. And the story in the delivery of Aesop is just dynamite. If you haven't listened to this before, even if you're not a fan of hip hop and rock, or excuse me, hip hop and rap, I would recommend picking this up. This is just some amazing, amazing stuff. And then getting close to the end here, you just got two more to go. A good album that you can find cheap. And I would say this one here. This is the Bus Boys, minimum age rock and roll. It's fun stuff. It's good. Very musical. It's kind of a new wavy rock with R&B roots. If you see this, it doesn't show up very often. I haven't seen copies of it very frequently, but you can get it cheap. You ought to be able to get this for less than $5. So that's a good one. And I don't think there are any reissues. So you're going to be finding original releases, and they're still going to be really cheap. And then now we are down to the last one, show an album with an acquired taste. And yeah, again, there's a few in my collection that I really like, but it is an acquired taste. Actually, this is not the last one. I got one more after this one, but it's going to be this one. The Residents. And this album is called Eskimo. Very cool label. It's not really music, but it's kind of like a cultural, sociological, anthropological study, but it's fictional, of Eskimo people. And so there's this, not a lyric sheet, but it shows the story, kind of like a narrative to go along as you're listening to it. Really way out there, but really just really brilliant. This was my first Residents album, and I am a collector of their material. I have almost every release that they have, but I will repeat, The Residents is an acquired taste. Now, the last one is show your most recent find. That's the key word there. So this is what I'm going to show you is not my most recent purchase, because they were either on my want list or something like. This is a find. This is something I just stumbled across in a record store one day before we all started sheltering in place. Now, again, what piqued my interest about this is I'm a big Frank Zappa fan, and of course there was the era of Frank Zappa's music with the Mothers, in which he had Flo and Eddie, the Fluorescent Leech and Eddie, who are Mark Volman and Howard Kalin from the Turtles. And then I saw this, because one of the things that I do whenever I go into a record store, if they've got a bin or a series of bins that say new arrivals, I always go through that first. And this was in there. So I just bought it. I knew about Flo and Eddie, and I knew about the Turtles, but I didn't know anything about any releases that they made post the Mothers of Invention. And I tell you what, this is just pure wonderful pop. it is really good stuff. So if you happen to see it, this just, all my perusing records, and I can't even remember what record store I found it in. I can't remember if it was one here in Chicago or on one of my trips to other cities, business trips, because every time I'm on a business trip to another city, I always make sure I have time to check out local record stores. And but anyway, Mark Volman, Howard Kalin, the Fluorescent Leech and Eddie. If you see it, and you were a fan of that era, a fan of the Turtles, or a fan of that era with Frank Zappa, that with Flo and Eddie, it's a purchase that you're going to enjoy. You're going to like it. Okay, wrapping up here, the list of questions that I just provided the answers for are going to be in the down under here. Please like the video, subscribe, and so that you can keep up. I will be having other videos coming out shortly. I hope you enjoy them. I really enjoy presenting this to you. I'm having a great time doing it. And until the next time, please enjoy your music.